The Ford EcoSport takes the underpinnings of the brand's Fiesta Super Mini and reworks them to better tackle the urban jungle. This may be a late arrival in the small crossover class, but it brings the segment something different in a cute but rugged package that target buyers will probably like. Compromises have been made with its approach, but if you're city-bound but adventurous at heart, there'll be plenty to like here. Back in 2002, Ford did something very unusual. It missed an opportunity. The occasion was the launch of a model called the Fusion, a kind of Fiesta on stilts that offered a trendier, chunkier, more practical, yet more stylish take on Britain's best-selling car. Here, more than a decade on, is the model that vehicle should and could have been. It's called the Ford EcoSport. You might recognise the kind of car this is. There are, after all, plenty of them about these days, Super Mini-based so-called crossover models, offering SUV style and attitude in a trendier, more versatile small package. Back at the turn of the century, the Fusion could have bought the market exactly that, and done so nearly a decade before segment-defining small crossovers like Nissan's Juke came along. Ford even presented it in trendy 4x4 regalia in motor show concept form, but shrank back from selling the car that way in the showrooms, where it was merely presented as a slightly bigger, slightly more versatile kind of Fiesta. That mistake won't of course be made with this EcoSport, which, like its class counterparts, is being marketed with the full urban jungle treatment. It doesn't have four-wheel drive because the city streets and school-run pavements of its natural habitat don't need it, but its raised driving position and chunky looks offer up a bit of Amazonian attitude, even if in truth this car is more CBeebies than SAS in its take on hostile street life. The tall sides, faux 4x4 undertrays and big bumpers all suggest something originally intended to be an SUV, but whose designer thought better of it at the last minute. This, though, is what the market wants. Every mainstream manufacturer today either offers a Super Mini-based crossover car of this sort or has one on the drawing board. Indeed, Ford could still have entered this segment earlier if it had bought us the first-generation version of this car that was designed and engineered solely for the South American market. Wisely, perhaps, the Blue Oval chose not to. Just as with its larger Cougar crossover model, the approach instead was wait, watch the opposition, then try and come up with something better. Something like this EcoSport? Let's see. The news that this car is based on a Ford Fiesta should certainly set you off in a positive frame of mind when it comes to the drive on offer. The issue, though, is one of exactly what would happen to a Fiesta if you gave it a lofty 200mm ride height, a bit of extra weight and a chunky high-riding body. After all, even Ford's chassis engineers aren't miracle workers. In the event, it seems like they're pragmatists. From their point of view, though it would have been nice to have been able to give this car the sweet handling sharpness of a Fiesta or a Focus, that would have entailed ride quality firmer than most typical small crossover segment buyers would probably want. People with no need and even less desire to throw their cars about. So the EcoSport development team chose instead to put their efforts into ride and refinement. So, though this car corners with more body roll than I thought it might, it rides far better than I ever thought it would. Better than any other car in this class, in fact. It's also quieter than any other small crossover I can think of in this segment. That and the supple ride together make this one of the few models of this kind in which I'd very happily undertake a long journey. Of course, the exact level of refinement you get will be heavily influenced by the choice of engine you make. There are actually three options. The least powerful of the trio, the 90 PS 1.5 litre TDCi diesel, offering the most pulling power, though even there we're only talking about a modest 203 Newton meters of grunt, which probably won't be sufficient if you were thinking of doing a bit of serious towing. Here, 62 miles an hour is 14 seconds away from rest, en route to a maximum of just 99 miles an hour. Most EcoSport buyers, I'd imagine though, will want one of the petrol options. Perhaps that'll be the normally aspirated 112 PS 1.5 litre variant that manages 62 miles an hour in 13.3 seconds on the way to 107 miles an hour. Now, this is the only unit you can order with optional 6-speed power shift automatic transmission, though bear in mind that if you take up that option, the weight that your EcoSport can potentially tow will fall from 750 kilograms to a mere 400 kilograms. Overall, the best engine option is probably the one I'm trying here, a 125 PS 1 litre EcoBoost petrol model, which manages to be significantly more economical than the base petrol variant, while still managing to improve upon that car's performance figures. Here, 62 miles an hour from rest occupies only 12.7 seconds on the way to 112 miles an hour. Plus, there's about 30 kilograms less weight in the nose with this smaller 3-cylinder engine fitted, which means that turning into corners feels a touch sharper. Or at least it would if there were a bit more feel from the electric power steering. Still, as I've already suggested, this car isn't designed for handling heroics. Instead, it'll be at its happiest in an urban jungle you'll be able to tackle from a raised driving position over 150 millimeters higher than that of a Fiesta. The light power steering will help here, as will the slick 5-speed gearbox and a decently tight 10.6 meter turning circle. In fact, the only real issues arise when the time comes to reverse into a parking space. That's the point when you'll find your rear view somewhat compromised by the huge tailgate-mounted spare wheel. It tacks another 20 centimetres onto the back of the car and makes the distance to what you're reversing towards that bit trickier to gauge. Rear parking sensors are optional, and I definitely recommend forking out for them. I should probably finish by talking about off-road capability, but then again, perhaps on second thoughts, maybe not. That might just encourage people to go places with this car that possibly they shouldn't. I say possibly because this EcoSport isn't quite as feeble in this regard as you might expect. True, you don't get the optional 4-wheel drive system that Ford offers on this car in South America. Apparently there'd be no demand for it here. Or any kind of Peugeot 2008 style grip control system to maximise the front end grip. You do have. On the other hand though, the 200mm ground clearance figure I mentioned earlier means that this car sits higher off the ground than some RAV4 style soft-roading SUVs, which means that in the very unlikely event of an owner fitting it with a proper set of winter tyres, it would probably get you a surprisingly long way. Ford talks bullishly of a 22.1 degree approach angle, a 35 degree departure angle and a wading depth of 550 millimetres. The EcoSport is a real global effort, designed in Brazil, with the version in our showrooms built and originally launched in India. It leans heavily on Ford's so-called Kinetic 2 design language, with its large trapezoidal grille, smeared back headlights, short overhangs, and an interesting blend of sharp angles and more organic curves that try and soften a front end sheerer than the north face of the Eiger. Joao Ramos's design team were clearly aiming for a bit of SUV attitude, but some may feel that the finished result sails a little close to cuteness, with a look described by one writer as being akin to a chihuahua in a studded collar. The Blue Oval brand will probably argue this to be exactly what many potential buyers would want, and I wouldn't disagree. These sharp-looking headlights feature LED running strips. There are indicators integrated into the door mirrors, and there's a decent amount of shape and style in the flanks. As with most designs of this kind, it's very sensitive to colour and trim choice, so if you're a potential buyer, I'd spend a bit of time on that if I were you. You can't go all out with the different roof colours, two-tone paint jobs and snazzy stripes some crossover rivals will offer, but all of that can look a little ridiculous anyway. A shape that's basically right, like this one, doesn't need too much tinsel embellishment, though I would be tempted to add the optional 17-inch alloy wheels in place of the 16 inches that I have here. Talking of wheels brings me to this one, the rear-mounted spare. Yes, we're back to the SUV look of the 90s, which apparently is still very much in vogue in this car's home Brazilian market, where quick and easy access to the spare wheel is essential for safety reasons. Now that's all well and good, but this is supposed to be a global Ford design, and the company must know that outside of the tropics, buyers generally don't take to this feature. This isn't necessarily because they don't like the rugged look, or because they don't want the kind of proper full-size spare wheel that's such a rare feature in most of today's modern cars. No, this is why buyers don't like it. A huge spare wheel on the back means you can't fit a conventional top-hinged tailgate, and the side-opening rear door you must have instead creates all kinds of awkwardness when you're trying to access the boot when backed into a tight parking space. Even if you're not in a restricted parking bay but merely trying to get stuff out of the boot when parked at the side of the road, there's the issue that the side opening door is hinged on the left side. Now that means it opens away from the pavement, so when you get your stuff out, you can't put taller things straight onto the safety of the sidewalk. Instead, you have to put them onto the ground, then move them out of the path of the door before it can be shut. Now, this wouldn't be such an issue if the kind of opening rear door glass section that you get on many modern estates and SUVs was present here for getting smaller items in and out. But unfortunately, this big spare wheel doesn't permit that either. All that said, it's a feature you soon learn to live with, maybe even to like. Toyota Land Cruiser owners seem to. And without it, you'd either have to have one of those fiddly tyre sealant kits, good luck with one of those on a wet and windy night stranded at the roadside, or put up with the spare wheel eating into your boot space. That wasn't something the EcoSport designers could countenance, given that this car must try and cram family-sized levels of practicality into a total length of under 4 metres. Even as it is, the 346-litre capacity isn't one of the largest in the segment. Still, it is over 40% more than the pathetic total you get in a rival Nissan Juke, and you can increase the capacity to as much as 375 litres while still carrying folk in the back, provided your rear seat occupants don't mind their backrest angle being tilted more vertically. If you want more space and can flatten the 60/40 split folding rear bench, then up to 1,238 litres is available. Transport of bulkier items will be aided by the way that these smart standard fit aluminium roof rails enable bikes and roof boxes to go up top quite easily. On to rear seat space. Now, getting in isn't especially easy as the door aperture is quite narrow, but once inside you'll find the back of an EcoSport a surprisingly pleasant place to be, thanks not only to the high airy roofline but also to the fact that the rear seats are set slightly above those at the front for a better view out. It helps that they can recline for greater comfort on longer trips too. Of course, as with many cars in this class, there'll be the issue of restricted width if, rather optimistically, you're trying to cram 3 full-sized adults in back here, but a trio of kids will be just fine. And up front, well, the Fiesta DNA that's lacking in the exterior looks is certainly well in evidence here, most notably with the mobile phone style array of buttons on the centre console. It's a button fest that can seem rather overly complex at first, but one you quickly adjust to. The 6-way adjustable driver's seat offers a supportively commanding perch, and the instruments are clear and concise. As for build quality, well, I think I could have guessed that one of these is screwed together in an Indian factory from the hard utilitarian plastics used around much of the dash. Still, it all feels solid, and Ford's European division has done its best to plush things up with this smart gear stick and leather-trimmed multifunction steering wheel. It's a practical cabin too. The odd coat hook would have been nice, but in terms of stowage space, owners are undeniably well provided for, with no fewer than 20 different cubbies and compartments for things like phones, sunglasses, coins, bottles, drinks cans and chocolate bars. You get properly sized door bins, able to swallow a 1.5 litre bottle of water. Then there's a decently sized cooled glove box that can take up to 4 330 millilitre cans, large seat back pockets and a drawer under the front seat for the passenger to keep valuable items away from prying eyes. Expect to pay somewhere in the £15,000 to £17,000 bracket for your EcoSport once you've allowed for a few well-chosen extras. The range itself is pretty simple. A basic petrol 1.5 litre petrol unit with the £1,500 option of PowerShift 6-speed automatic transmission, or the preferable and much more efficient manual gearbox 1 litre EcoBoost petrol variant that I'm testing here. The other alternative that Ford expects around 35% of buyers to choose is the modestly powered 91 brake horsepower 1.5 litre TDCi diesel. On to the value proposition all that represents. As usual, for proper comparisons, you'll need to be comparing apples with apples by looking at Super Mini rather than family hatchback-based crossover models. In other words, if it makes more sense, cars in the Nissan Juke segment rather than the Nissan Qashqai class. This Ford was launched only with plush titanium trim, which was why prices started quite high by the standards of the segment at around £15,000. Rival models like Nissan's Juke, Peugeot's 2008 and Kia's Soul can all look cheaper because they all come in price-leading base trim guises. But if you actually match these cars spec for spec against an equivalent EcoSport, you'll ultimately find that there's not a lot in it. Ford hopes that potential buyers will be won over by this car's sharp handling and clever connectivity options. Won over enough not to consider saving a few thousand on cheaper small crossover competitors like Renault's Captur and Dacia's Duster? Perhaps. The Renault is another car of this kind that's less rewarding than this Ford at the wheel, while the Dacia's poor running cost returns and lower residual values will eat substantially into the savings you'd make when originally buying it. Before we leave discussion of potential alternatives to this car, it's probably also worth mentioning that for the kind of money Ford is asking here, you could also get yourself a base version of a compact crossover sized closer to something in the bigger Qashqai class, in the form of something like a Suzuki SX4 S-Cross or a Mitsubishi ASX. Other compact crossover models that try and straddle the gap between something Juke-shaped and something Qashqai-sized will all, in rough terms, cost you £2,000 to £3,000 more once you start comparing like-for-like engines and spec against this EcoSport. Now here I'm talking of cars like Vauxhall's Mokka, Skoda's Yeti, Mini's Countryman and Jeep's Renegade. If, having considered all of this, you're tempted towards ownership of this car, then you'll be wanting to know exactly what's included as standard across the range. And the answer is that plush titanium trim sees this car come very well equipped indeed. All variants get 16-inch alloy wheels, silver roof rails, front fog lights, electrically adjustable door mirrors, electric windows, front and rear, and a Thatcham alarm. Inside there's keyless entry and start, automatic temperature controlled air conditioning that also cools a glove box able to hold 6 330 millilitre cans, a decent quality stereo featuring USB and aux-in sockets with controls on the leather covered steering wheel, a trip computer, a height adjustable driver's seat and, thank goodness, a proper full-sized spare wheel. If that's not enough, an extra cost Titanium X pack will add larger 17-inch wheels, leather seat trim, cruise control, automatic headlights, rain sensing wipers and an auto dimming rearview mirror. Extra cost items worth looking at include rear parking sensors and maybe even the neat rooftop bike carrier, which can hold up to 40 kilograms. Alternatively, Ford has a tie-in with Tool, so you can get some of the best bike, ski and snowboard carriers on the market direct from your Ford dealer at reasonable prices. One thing you'll certainly have to watch out for when finalising the spec of this car is colour choice. Rather annoyingly, if you order this car in any colour other than bright yellow, you'll have to pay extra for it, and around £500 extra if the hue in question is metallic, as here, as nearly all the colour choices are. What I wouldn't mind finding extra cash for is Ford's clever sync connectivity system with AppLink. For around £250, you get a setup that, via a rather small and old tech 3.5-inch display screen, talks to your MP3 player, will Bluetooth link in your phone, read USB drives and can read incoming texts aloud. The really clever bit though is the AppLink part, the way that this car is one of the first to be able to allow its owners to voice activate apps. These include the wildly popular Spotify music streaming service and Hotels.com, an app enabling the booking of rooms in 145,000 hotels in 19,000 destinations worldwide. Other apps available for the AppLink system include Audioteca, that's ideal if, like me, you like to listen to audiobooks, Kaliki, which reads you the daily newspapers, Glimpse, that allows you to share your location with family and friends, and the WCities, City Seeker and Event Seeker apps that deliver comprehensive city and event guides, cluing you fully in on wherever your journey might take you. Perhaps most crucially, AppLink also enables you to access a TomTom turn-by-turn navigation app featuring audible instructions and on-screen mapping. Why is that so important? Well, because you might be astonished to find that this is virtually the only car on sale today outside of bargain basement models that can't be specified with a conventional satellite navigation system, even as an option. The bit I like most about the Sync Connectivity AppLink package, though, has nothing to do with apps. Instead, it's the fact that the setup includes the potentially life-saving Ford Emergency Assistance feature, which, in the event of an accident, will see an emergency call automatically placed to summon assistance anywhere you might be in mainland Europe. But what about more conventional safety provision? Well, the various elements provided are all integrated under Ford's Intelligent Protection System. This gets as many of the electronic safety features as possible talking to one another to ensure a coordinated response should you get out of shape or try to drive your EcoSport into something solid. You certainly aren't going to feel hard done by in the airbag department, this Ford being fitted with twin front, side and curtain airbags, plus a driver's knee bag. The seatbelts feature load limiters and pretensioners, plus there are anti-submarining seat bases and Isofix child seat mountings on the outer rear seats. This all contributed to an excellent 93% score in Euro NCAP testing for interior occupant safety. The not so good news is that the body shape of this EcoSport resulted in a so-so 58% result for pedestrian safety, so don't step out in front of one. Fortunately, plenty of thought has gone into how owners can avoid collisions in the first place, and to that end there's plenty of electronic assistance. Unfortunately, the hill holder system that'll stop you drifting backwards at junctions and acquainting following drivers with your full-size spare wheel is for some reason fitted only to the automatic variant. But you will get the usual expected aids for braking, traction and stability control, plus tyre pressure monitoring. It's a lot harder to get a boxy crossover model to return efficient fuel and CO2 returns than it is with a conventional Super Mini or family hatchback. To illustrate the point, let's take the 1 litre EcoBoost petrol-powered EcoSport model that I'm driving here. The 125 PS engine beneath the bonnet returns 65.7 miles to the gallon on the combined cycle when fitted to Ford's Fiesta. Here it manages 53.3 miles to the gallon, which is a bit of a drop, but probably acceptable given the extra weight this car must cart around. It's a similar story when it comes to CO2, the Fiesta's 99 grams per kilometre showing falling to 125 grams per kilometre here. The other issue in both cases is whether the quoted stats are actually achievable in day-to-day driving. At least the government believes them, which is good news from a tax point of view. Whatever the reality, an EcoBoost EcoSport will certainly be a lot more economic to run than an ordinary base 1.5 litre petrol-powered variant. That 1.5 litre car managing 44.8 miles to the gallon on the combined cycle and 149 grams per kilometre of CO2. Mind you, even that is still better than you get in equivalent versions of close rivals like Vauxhall's Mokka or Kia's Soul. Inevitably, though, the cheapest way to run an EcoSport is to choose the diesel version, which is why Ford reckons this variant will mop up around 40% of all UK sales. The 120 grams per kilometre of CO2 reading isn't anything to write home about for a Super Mini-based diesel model, but most owners will probably be quite happy with the predicted 61.4 miles to the gallon combined cycle fuel showing. This achievable even without the stop and start system that the 1 litre EcoBoost petrol variant alone offers as standard. A shift indicator on the dash is there to help owners achieve fuel efficient gear changes. What else? Well, the residual should be par for the mainstream contenders in this class. And there's the usual 3-year, 60,000 mile warranty, extendable to a 4th or even a 5th year for not a lot extra. Plus, you get a year's roadside assistance included too. Insurance groupings start at Group 9 for the diesel, rise to 10 for the 1.5 litre petrol, and top out at Group 11 for this 1 litre petrol EcoBoost variant. If Ford had bought us this car, or something like it, 10 years ago when it could have done, you can't help thinking that today our roads would be flooded with the things. As it is, the EcoSport is a late arrival to an already oversubscribed small crossover market sector that's bursting with alternative talent. Still, a fashionably tardy arrival at any party can always work to your advantage. And in developing this model, the Blue Oval brand has clearly studied the segment's existing offerings and sought to provide something a little different. You can see that by the way it goes against the grain in this class. Things like the high ride height, the side-opening tailgate, and this car's refusal to prioritise sporty handling, all mark it out as a different way to go. In truth, all of these things were forced upon this design by the fact that, despite the global car claims, this model was first and foremost developed for a South American market rather than a European one. That doesn't mean that the EcoSport can't work here though. It's good looking, fashionable and practical. Ride and refinement are almost class leading. It's very well equipped across the board. And the Sync connectivity AppLink system is just brilliant. All these reasons will combine with the small crossover segment's current popularity to ensure that Ford will probably sell as many of these as they can import. My daughter, for example, would love one. It is, as ever, a case of giving the market what it wants.